Hi, good evening, and welcome to Community Homeworks class on roofing systems. During class, if you have any questions, please type them in the comments and we will attempt to answer them as best we can. Our instructor tonight is Lee Taylor. He is not a roofing contractor, so we may not have an answer to your question, but we'll certainly try to help you any way we can. We'd like to remind you that we are a nonprofit organization and do rely on donations and grants to continue to bring you our programs. If you would like to make a contribution, please watch across the bottom of your screen, and information on how to do that will scroll across the bottom. And our basic way to contact us in case you think of a question if you watch this video at a not live time. Again, this is a class on roofing systems, how your roof is constructed, what all the parts are, and why it works to keep your house warm and dry. Our instructor tonight is Lee Taylor.
Hello, how are you? I guess I'm on, huh? All right.
And he has lots of information to share. Thank you, Lee.
Yes, thanks, Dean. Yeah, like Dean said, if you have questions, type them in so we can hopefully be able to answer them best we can. So this is roofing systems. Say this about the roof. To me, a decent roof is one of the most important, top 5 most important things in your home. If your roof is leaking, it just leads to so many other issues. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight is just so that you get a rough understanding. Are we going to get into how to fix roofs? No. We're going to get into kind of what it is you're looking at and what to look for, so that you can get somebody out there to be able to repair your roof or replace your roof. So what we're going to be starting off with is we're going to be identifying just basically the roofing systems that are on most roofs. And actually, I'm going to pick on this guy over here. We have a cool little model. So you have these here. These are your rafters or trusses. This is a rafter, but that's what holds your basically creates your roof or hold your sheathing. So you have your rafters or trusses. On top of that, you're going to have your sheathing. Now, your sheathing is basically just decking. So there's a couple of different types of sheathing out there. I'm going to be bouncing around. Sorry. So on an older home, what they did was they used 1x materials, roughly an inch thick, and a lot of them are, 11 or 12 inches wide. And they just laid those on top of the rafters of the trusses. Well, rafters back then. And they left gaps in between. And then the roofing was put on top of that. In today's day, you have what's called OSB, oriented strand board. That is the most common. And a lot of times what happens is with the older roofs, and they have those that some people call them slat roofs or whatever, that's for the sheathing. A lot of times they'll lay that OSB right over the top of those 1x's. So OSB, another one you can potentially have is what's called plywood. Plywood is pretty good. It has its issues. I'll explain some of those in a little bit. So plywood sheathing, OSB sheathing, most common. The 1x sheathing is a little less common nowadays. It may still be on there, but then what we have is we have a roof felt. That's this. And then we have the actual shingles, and this is just a model. So we have a little better show over here. So you can do a side view of this. This is showing either your rafters or trusses, and then this is your sheathing. Now this is, because it's a model, this is only 1/4 inch sheathing. It's normally 1/2 inch. No, 1/2 inch is about the norm. Some roofs have a little bit thicker sheathing. On top of that, you have what's called roof felt. So What roof felt is basically it's a petroleum product. It's basically paper that is soaked with type of petroleum product, and what it does is it basically makes a layer for your shingles to be able to go on. What you have, what's happening in today's world is you have what's called ice and water shield. So what that is basically it's a membrane, and it's real sticky, and it's relatively thick. And what they'll do is they'll pull this off and lay down strips. Now this is usually about 3 foot tall, and it comes in rolls. So why do they do that? What they do is they'll lay that, and you can kind of see it underneath here. That's what this is. This is ice and water shield. And that usually gets laid about 4 to 5 feet up from the outer edge of your roof. And what it does is it helps with what are called ice dams, which we'll get into in a little bit. So a lot of times, at minimum, they're gonna lay that about 4 or so feet, 4 to 5 feet from the edge of your roof up. The other parts of your roof that you have are this is called drip edge. So this is a piece of aluminum that's laid in there. The other stuff is put on top of it. What this basically does is it gives you a nice clean edge. It also lets what's called fascia be able to get tucked up underneath it, so you don't see any of this framing. The other part of a roof system is what's called a fascia board. So this is a dimensional 2x fascia board. Sometimes they're 1x material, meaning it's only 1 inch thick. And then the other part you have is what this is called is soffit, or an overhang, what some people will call. So let's say this is your main part of the house. This is actually what overhangs the edge of your house. So not all roofs have this type of an overhang. Some are right out on the edge of the house itself, and you don't have much of an overhang. Others have up to a 2 foot overhang. So, or soffit area. If you were to look on the underside of that soffit, you're going to have inside your attic. So if you were to peek on the underside of this, I'll just set this up here. You're going to have what are called ventilation baffles, and those sit in there like this. And they actually, let's say this is your main part of your house. It actually sticks into the attic about, 2 or 3 feet past that. And what that's doing is it's actually really what you see is this part is actually, cut this so it's a little bit easier to see. What it actually does is this allows fresh air into your attic for ventilation. We'll get more into ventilation here in a minute. So if you were to look up into your soffit, that ventilation baffle would be sticking, or should be sticking, down in this area here. And then it's running into the house. And then you have some kind of a block or something like that to make sure insulation doesn't fall out into your soffit area. And then finished area, and they'll talk about this in siding class, is actual vented soffit that lets fresh air in, that collects in there and then shoots up through and into your attic to be able to help cool that attic down. So there are 2 parts to the ventilation of an attic. There's the ventilation baffles, or some means for that fresh air to be able to get into that attic. And then you have to have a way for that hot air to be able to get out. So there's a couple of variants on this. So this is what's called a roof vent. Some people call them turtle vents, square vents. This would sit up near the peak. And I'm not doing this right, but it would sit up right up close to your peak of your roof where all that hot air is going to be. And a hole gets cut into your roof. Hot air goes in through and ventilates out. So you have to have both. That's the thing, is that a lot of people they may put vents, whether it's a turtle vent or it's a ridge vent, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But if they don't have any soffit venting or any fresh air in, it doesn't really help. So you need both those, if that makes sense. You need intake and exhaust. So that's the venting side of it. And so we're going to touch on these a little bit more also. And then you have the shingles themselves. The shingles themselves most often are some kind of an asphalt shingle. Could be a fiberglass shingle. And there's varying grades. There's anywhere from a 10 to a 15-year shingle, which is actually very inexpensive. But again, it only lasts about 10, 15 years before the weather and everything else starts beating it up. To a style that's called, these are chunks of it. This is called an architectural style. And it's stuck where you have the shingle itself is a little bit thicker. Generally, these are going to be a little higher quality shingle. It's going to show a little more dimension on your roof. Versus, what I'm getting at is versus like a 3-tab. So a 3-tab shingle means that you have 1, 2, and this has been cut. You'd have 3 of these tabs, and that's what that style of roof is. So if they, if a roofing guy or a roofing person comes in and says, "Oh, you have a 3-tab shingle," blah blah blah, that's what they're talking about. And this is, like I said, this is kind of your basic shingle, and then you have architectural shingles. And I said there's varying degrees to all of those. We'll get into that a little bit more also. You also have metal roofing. It's a piece like this. You may see these occasionally, and these are laid in. And, you know, metal roofs are nice because they don't degrade necessarily like shingles do, whether asphalt or even fiberglass style shingles. Metal roofing can be a little more expensive, but sometimes people like to do that because of either the pitch of their roof, and we'll talk about pitch in a minute, or they just don't want to have to replace their shingles. So, I mean, metal roofing is always one of those options that you can do. The thing I will say about metal roofing is that, you know, you can buy this usually at most box stores. And you'll look at they'll come in, you know, however wide by however long, right? And you'll look at those and you'll say, "Oh, it's relatively inexpensive." The part where they get you is the connectors, the ends, and that sort of thing. So if you're gonna do a metal roof, and I left it over there, that doesn't help me at all. If you're gonna do a metal roof, right, and they lay that metal roof on, you have to have something out here on the end to be able to close this in. And then you have to have certain parts on the top and all that sort of stuff. And that's usually where they get you on these metal roofs. Like I said, the main portion of the metal roof usually is relatively inexpensive as roofs go. But it's the parts and pieces a lot of times that you, if you're thinking about using a metal roof, ask that question, like, how much is it going to cost me for, you know, all these other bent pieces? Because sometimes they're made. Sometimes you can get people that will bend them up on site and put them on. It just kind of depends. And then how they're fastened down and stuff is a little bit different also. So those are the basic components of a roof. And we're going to go through each one and how they kind of interact with each other. Now, as far as the roof styles, I'll show you this picture here because this is going to be the easier way to do it. So, and I'm going to be throwing some terms around here. So you have what this end here is called the gable end. Is the point. Sometimes when we were talking about venting, sometimes vents are on these gable ends. They look like a triangle and they may have slots in them. And it may be, if you look at it closely, it has like screening in it or something like that. And it lets fresh air come in one side and vent out the other side. So you have what are called gable vents. All right. This is your ridge or your peak of your roof. Now, the other type of venting that's out there is what's called a ridge vent. So if you have a roof that's like this, you may look up there and see, you may not see those turtle vents or those square vents, but you may look on the top and notice that you have something that's about that wide. This one's curled up a little bit, and it sits over the peak like this. And then there are shingles that actually go over the top of it, and they're kind of bent like this. And that's what's called a ridge vent. What they do with the sheathing on that is they'll bring their sheathing up, and then they'll cut it back, whatever is recommended, usually about 2 inches or so. So you have a 2-inch slot running down either edge of your peak. And then what the ridge style vent does is usually has some kind of a standoff like this. It holds that up. It sits on the shingles, the shingle up to the peak, hold it down a certain amount so that you don't cover up your venting. It lays over the top of them. It holds up this much, and it has this mesh in here. So it's letting hot air that gets up through your attic in here out and out these sides. So that's usually run down the whole length of the ridge of your roof. And then, like I said, to finish it off, they have these that are sitting like this. And I can't really hold these and then.
You want me to come help you?
Nah, I got it. So that's kind of what that looks like. That's a little hard to see. You know, it's usually if you're down the street or something, you can notice that, but that's what's called a ridge vent. We'll go back to this. So this is what's called a gable or a gable roof. Some roofs don't have this triangle point. They have what's called a hip style. And that's what this is where that fascia, that subfascia wraps all the way around in this part of the roof. It kind of does one of these sort of things. All we have is a picture really to show you. Actually, I lied. We can look right over here.
I don't know if you can do that because it's somebody else's house.
Oh, all right, we won't. Are we allowed to do that? All right,
I think you could.
Anyways, so yeah, what's called a hip style roof, meaning you don't have necessarily a gable. Where two roofs meet, and what it is let's say you have your one roof line going like this, and let's say you have another addition that's shooting out. You have what's called a valley. And a valley basically is just where two roofs meet, and that's what that is right there. It's showing that valley. So in this case, you'd have a valley on this side, you'd have a valley on that side. You have dormers. Some roofs have those. This little model up here has little dormers. You can kind of see how they're built in and stuff, and they kind of fade into the roof. So you may have something like that. And there's all variations. You can have a gable dormer, you can have a hip dormer. There's a lot of different variations. But if you basically understand the different styles, you're in usually pretty good shape. So as far as I want to pick on ventilation first. So remember I was saying the shingles and all that have a certain lifespan. And what is going to make a roof either last longer or wear out quicker? It's a multitude of things. So I'm going to start off with heat. So heat on its own, you get the sun and everything beating down on these shingles, and the UV rays and just the general weather and it's going to wear them out. But what happens is if you get excessive amount of heat inside your attic and it has nowhere to go, whether it's escaping out of a vent like that or a ridge vent, or it doesn't necessarily have fresh air coming in, that attic is going to get extremely hot. And what will happen a lot of times is that the shingles will heat up way past what they're meant to. And they will start getting more brittle. A lot of times they'll start curling up. Heat can really mess shingles up. So that's where I get to the ventilation side of things. is that, you know, if you're going to have a new roof put on, great. Make sure they put in adequate venting, but also they may want to check, this may require getting into your attic, that you have good soffit venting, that, you know, you have that fresh air coming in from your soffit area. All right. Now, sometimes that's not an option, especially on older houses. Sometimes they may not have this necessarily built into them, or just the way they're constructed. They do sell vents that are similar to sort of a ridge vent. They are actually down low, and they're basically they're cut in. They cut through the sheathing, and they make it so that fresh air can come in that direction and be able to escape up closer to that ridge. So there's always ways to get around this. But you want ventilation. So intake and exhaust, 2 parts of ventilation are real important. As far as the sheathing goes, this doesn't really, well, it matters. So the types of sheathing. So like I said, on the old style homes, I said those built up to 1920s, 1930s, sometimes the 40s. Again, it sort of depends on the builder. Like I said, they use that 1x planking, and then they put their sheathing and they put the roof felt and everything over the top of that. And like I said, most of the time by now, those roofs have had to been repaired, and usually cost effective means they're going to use what's called that OSB sheathing, and they're going to lay it right on top, or that OSB sheathing is going to be laid right on top of your rafters. So I'll pick on OSB first. OSB generally is going to be a little less expensive than something like plywood. Like I said, it's usually 1/2 inch thick. Generally, that's going to be pretty good. The only issue with OSB is that it does not do well with moisture, and this is where I'm getting to with the damages and whatnot to your shingles. That OSB can get really soft. You know, if you have a small leak in your roof, that OSB can start to get soft and spongy. And I've been on roofs where you're walking along and all of a sudden your foot almost goes through. About the only thing that's holding you there is the shingles that are actually laid on that roof. So with OSB roofs, it's one of those things where you want to make sure that you don't have a leak. The other issue is that, again, they don't do well with moisture. So what happens, and we'll peek on the underside of this again. So what's happening, imagine this is in your attic, right? So your roof deck is always going to be cold. I'm picking it wintertime. So if you don't have decent ventilation, and let's say you have a combination, lack of ventilation into your attic space, and you have a lack of insulation giving you that R value. You know, you should be talking about that when they talk about when they have the, what class am I thinking of? When they have the class on weatherization and stuff. But what will happen is you're going to get warm, moist air. It's going to migrate up through your insulation and everything. And what it's going to do is it moves up. It's going to condensate, just like on the side of a glass, cold glass on a hot, humid day. You're going to get condensation that's going to build up on the backside or underside of that roof sheathing. And, condensation is nothing more than moisture. And I've seen it where that actually, if you don't have good ventilation to be able to move that warm, moist air out before it has really a chance to sit and condensate, I've seen it where roofs can almost rot from the inside. And this is back to, we talk about not venting things like bath fans, especially, or hood vents into your attic, because it just adds to that. So back to the ventilation of why that's so important. So OSB generally is what you're going to have. Plywood, like I said, it is more resistant to moisture, but the issue is that plywood is nothing more than layers glued together. And what happens with this is when it gets moisture, and my wife and I can attest to this one, what it does is it has a tendency to delaminate all these. And it doesn't rot as easily as OSB, but it gets real soft. So that's where it's called delamination, basically, where that plywood is just pulled apart, it gets thicker and it gets weaker. So those are the two main as far as the roof decks go, as far as sheathing material goes. I'm going to pick on the ice and water shield. So your ice and water shield, like I said, so imagine this roof is nothing but sheathing like this. They've stripped off the old shingles. They're going to lay that ice and water shield about 4 to 5 foot up. Generally, what they're going to do is they're going to lay it a couple of feet past where the overhang starts. So let's say this is the overhang on the house, and this is your main house right here. This is about 1.5 feet or so, 2 foot overhang. Generally, that ice and water shield is going to run up a little bit past that. Now, why is that? Well, you have what's called ice damming. And we're going to come over here, and I'm actually going to draw this out. Be a little bit easier. You have what's called ice damming in the winter time. So you have your house, and this is your roof. This is your overhang. There's your part for your ventilation. I can do the same thing on the other side. Right? Your fresh air comes in. Your fresh air comes in. You have some means. Don't laugh too much at my bad drawing. You have some means of ventilation in and out, whether they're a ridge vent or a turtle vent or a square vent, something along that line. All right. What happens is that we're going to have red snow tonight. So you get snow that builds up on your roof. Now, in the attic, let's say this is your roof line here, and you have insulation in here. What happens is that, I'm going to cover all this stuff up. You get heat that migrates through and works up, and it hits the underside of the sheathing. It melts that snow. And what happens with that snow is, hope these are all whiteboards. It melts it, and that snow turns the water and it starts running down until it gets to about this point, because now all this area right here is a cold zone. This is all generally about the same temperature as it is outside. So what happens is that water stays in a liquid form up on the roof. It hits the start of that overhang and it freezes. And then it freezes again and it freezes again. And what happens is that snow may be gone, but you have what's called an ice dam. Now, next time that water comes down, it hits that dam and it has nowhere to go and it can build up. And what it will do is actually, we're going to go back over here. It actually works underneath your shingles. And what we'll do is, let's say your ice dam's up in this range here. I'm going to pick on this because it's down here. So water's coming here. Let's say your ice dam's running along this way. That water can work its way underneath the shingles and work its way back up and eventually drip into your house. So what that ice and water shield does is that membrane, again, is stuck down to that OSB or that plywood, and it's going to help prevent that. There are some houses and some builders that will actually use ice and water all the way up. And what their mode is that if you lose your shingles in a high windstorm or something along that line, you have this last layer of defense to be able to stop water from getting in to your roof. So the ice and water shield at minimum is helping stop that ice damming. And like I said, some builders now are actually even putting that ice and water shield all the way up to the ridge or taping their seams. So if you have a seam like this, you have another sheet, they'll get like a tape, something similar to this, and they'll tape over those joints. And that makes it so that, again, if you lose your shingles or something along that line, at least you don't have those gaps where those sheathing has met, where you're gonna get water damage getting into your house. A lot of the southern states are doing this even more so, where they have hurricanes and all that. So the ice and water shield, that's the main purpose of that. As far as the shingles, and like I was saying, you know, we talked about the architectural shingles and the 3-tab shingles and stuff like that. Generally, it's going to be, you get what you pay for. If you don't pay that much for shingles, you're going to get a shingle that's kind of basic. But generally, the thicker the shingle, the more grit it has on it, that sort of thing. Generally, it's going to be able to last longer. They do have shingles out there that are rated for higher wind rates and stuff. Here in Michigan has actually been bumped up a little bit. The issue with that is that I don't really want to mess with that one. So what happens is that wind can get underneath these shingles and lift them. And in really bad cases, it can lift up, breaking the shingles, and actually snap that shingle. In really bad cases, that piece can go flying into your yard, right? So that's part of understanding what is going on in your shingles. So generally what I'll say is after a windstorm or in the cold especially, sometimes that as things get cold, they get brittle. So if you're outside, you're walking along your yard, you should be doing a quick inspection of your roof, especially if you're finding pieces of shingle in the yard. You're going to look up there and you may see a section that's missing. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to see black underneath it necessarily, because when they lay these shingles, they kind of overlap them, they overlay them. And you can see that how that is here. So you may not necessarily have that much of a color contrast. Sometimes what you're looking at is just the missing part, if that makes sense. So so that is one of those things that can happen with shingles. You know, they can get wind damage, especially in the winter. Ice damming can actually cause a little bit of problems with them as far as getting water into your house. It can also damage that shingle also. I would say that that's probably one of the number one issues. The other issue is that shingles themselves can be damaged by tools. So go back to that ice damming that we were talking about. So a lot of times what people have are what are called roof rakes. We go over this a lot more in winter maintenance. But basically what it is, it's a long pole that basically pulls that snow off that roof. It's basically removing the fuel or the water source where ice damming can happen. But again, this is a wide, usually plastic, sometimes metal. And what people will do is it's on a really long pole, and they go up and they go slam, and they slam it down on their shingles, and then they drag off stuff. Hitting that sometimes, especially when it's real cold, may not be all that hot for shingles. I can actually weaken them. So if you're using a roof rake or something along that line, be gentle. And you definitely don't want to push. I've seen it where people have a roof rake and they push up, and it actually grabs the shingle like this and pulls it up. So you have to be gentle with those. The other common source of damage is that if people get up on their roof and it's too hot, and especially if they're wearing shoes that have an aggressive tread or something along that line, they can actually turn and pivot and do all sorts of things. And what it will do is it will actually remove a lot of this grit, the asphalt grit that's usually built into that shingle. All right. So that's another common wear, and I'm going to show you this one right here. This is kind of an example. I don't know if you can necessarily tell this on the video. You can see where a lot of that grit's kind of been like almost scraped away. And that's usually common what happens when you have that shingle's really hot and somebody's up there moving around on those shingles and not necessarily thinking about that. The other common problems that shingles can have is debris. And debris can be a bunch of different things. So you can have something like a tree limb. It's a general rule. If you have a tree limb that's hanging over your house and it's touching your shingles, you want that tree limb moved back away from your shingles. Because what will happen is that tree limb, during windstorm and stuff, it's going to go like this and rub back and forth on those shingles and wear them out prematurely. In worst case, it's actually going to be able to snag up underneath and lift them up and stuff. So generally, if you have a branch or something that's overhanging and touching your roof, you want that thing pruned back. The other common form of damage is, let's say you have a limb that falls. And I'm talking a limb, I'm talking like a 2-inch diameter or 3-inch diameter limb. What will happen is that limb will sit on that roof and the wind will blow and it will rock and pivot and do this sort of thing. And I've seen it where that branch or a little chunk of that branch actually almost drills a hole through the shingles. So again, if you see loose limbs on your roof, if you can get them down safely on your own, great. If you can't, you may want to get somebody out there that can get those off because those can cause damage. And sometimes that damage can be really hard to see. The other is stuff like moss and stuff like that. So a lot of times if you're on a north-facing edge, you don't get much sunlight, you have a lot of shade from trees, that sort of stuff, you may get moss that actually grows on that roof. Is that a bad thing? Yeah, pretty much. It basically degrades that shingle. It actually grows on there and they actually start breaking that shingle down. There are products out there that you can have somebody come out and spray that down, or you can get up there yourself again, as long as you can do it safely, and spray this on. What it does is actually kills the moss and makes it so that it just stops growing. And I think some of it actually makes it so it releases off the shingles and comes off. So moss growing on the shingles is not necessarily a good thing either. The other is back to that valley. So like the picture we have here, the valley of the roof where you have two roofs meeting. That usually is a really good area for leaves or pine needles. Pine needles are a good one, where they'll actually pile up in that valley and it will start to break that shingle down, rot it, and all that good stuff. So if you have valleys, and especially if you notice that, especially in the fall, you have a ton of things, organic matter that's sitting in that valley, that's where you could gently use one of those roof rigs just to pull that excess stuff off and get it out of that valley. If you have gutters on your house, I'm going to pick on this. So if you have gutters on your house, and let's say you don't have a gutter system like this, and you're having to clean your gutters out once a year at least, you're always going to have a certain amount of grit. So that's shingle grit. Basically, that's the stuff that's laid into that asphalt. If you have a whole bunch of that, I mean, it's like year after year, you're getting like a layer that's like a 1/4 inch thick or so, all on the bottom of your gutters. Sometimes that's your roof saying, hey, I'm getting to the point where I may need to be replaced or at least looked at. And you can lose grit off those shingles for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's just age. Sometimes it's damage, like we were talking about, things on it, people walking on it, that sort of stuff. Another real common thing that will happen to roofs is you get what's called hail damage. So you get these ice balls of hail that will hit it, and it can be difficult to see that. Even if you're up there looking at it, you have to really kind of understand what it is you're looking at. So my advice with that is that if you have a significant hailstorm, and I'm talking hail that's, a little bigger than, say, a nickel or up, it might be worth talking to your insurance company and have somebody come out and be able to take a look. Because a lot of times, if you have that shingle or the hail damage on your shingles, your insurance is going to cover that. So like I said, a lot of ways to be able to kind of damage those shingles. Also, understanding what it is that you're looking at. So we talked about the shingle lifting and ripping off, and you may see a different color behind it because generally it's about black or so behind it. That's kind of the base color. It's a little rougher when you have black shingles. The other is the grit. We were talking about the excess grit that is in your gutters if you have them. The other is what's called curling. So this is where if you're looking at the shingles, those tips may curl up like this. On this side here may curl up like this. All right. That usually is an indication that something is going on, where those edges are curling up. I've seen some roofs where the whole thing is curling up like this. All right. So there, you want to kind of look at that. You also can look at this gap right here. This gap, as a general rule, is going to be relatively consistent, especially on something like a 3-tab roof. If you notice that gap is starting to widen out a little bit, or it's something that catches your eye, it might be worth having somebody come out and look at that. Like I said, there's a couple of ways those roofs will talk to you and kind of say, hey, something's not right. Like I said, sun damage, that's normal. The ultra, the UV rays are going to work on it. The rain and all the normal stuff are going to be going after that roof and slowly degrading it over time. We talked about the condensation on the inside. That one you don't necessarily see from the outside. So that condensation happening possibly on the underside of your deck, on the underside of that sheathing, is that something you're going to be able to tell from looking from the outside? Usually not. That usually boils down to, like I said, a combination of lack of insulation and a lack of ventilation. Sometimes you can pop your head up in the attic and look. Wintertime is a really good time to be able to see that because that's when it's really going to be happening. It doesn't happen so much in warmer weather. It happens when those temperatures are cold. So that condensation on the inside. Sometimes when you're looking up, you see frost.
There are pine needles on my garage roof from a neighbor's tree.
Yep.
Is it better to blow them off with my leaf blower or use a plastic rake? Roof is 3 years old.
I mean, you can use a plastic rake, as long as you're careful. You can work off of a little step ladder. Some people will use a leaf blower. You do have the right to be able to trim. So if you have that pine tree that's overhanging your property and overhanging your garage roof, you do have a right to be able to, in a sense, let's say this is your property line. Your property line runs all the way up. So if that limb is hanging over your property line, you have a right to be able to trim that part that's overhanging your roof. So you do have that right also. But yeah, how you remove it, I said plastic rake, yep, that'll work. Leaf blower will work. Again, it has to be something that you're comfortable with as far as getting up there. I wouldn't necessarily suggest walking on your roof. Depending on the pitch, it can be pretty steep. There are roofs that are real pitched like this. And I don't even like getting on those roofs. So a lot of times if it's a garage or something or a single story house, you can work off a step ladder and, gently pull that off. But yeah, that's something you'd want to be able to get that done. Oh, let's see. Branches. Single duration. Loose there. I was looking at this. All right. Now, all right, we have about 10 minutes. So we have what's called the other things that you may see on your roof are what are called roof boots. All right. So what these are, they're put in, and pipes usually are pushed up through them. You may have like a vent pipe. It doesn't have to necessarily be white. They may be a cast iron pipe or something like that. But what happens is that this is a rubber membrane. This is actually meant for a bigger pipe. And that rubber membrane is supposed to be tight around that pipe. And what can happen over time is this can degrade. And when you look at it, it actually has cracks and stuff like this. So sometimes water can get through that boot and leak down into your house. Because again, it's just going into the attic, into a chase or something like that. So they may say, oh, if you have a leak in your house or something like that, and a roofer comes out and says, oh, it's your roof boots. That's what they're talking about. They said there's some kind of a pipe that's pushing up through, and then usually what they can do is they can get up there and be able to replace that boot. So a couple of different styles: plastic, there's metal, but you have roof boots also. The other thing you have what's called flashing. This one's a little harder to show. So imagine you have your roof coming down like this, and you have another roof coming off the edge. So you have your roof coming down like this, and you have another roof that's kind of like this, right? So right in this area right here, where it meets a wall, you have what's called step flashing. And basically this is what they call shingle style. So as water moves down, it jumps to the next one, jumps to the next one. This is actually put up. Don't have a good way to really show this necessarily. Well, I do, actually. I do. I need a pointer. Oh, I need this. There's a pointer, kind of. So let's go to this side right here. And I'm going to do a bad thing and stand on this.
I can't see what you're doing.
Okay. So this part right here, where you have this roof line coming down and it meets up against a wall or another roof. This is where that step flashing is going to be put in. A lot of times that step flashing is tucked underneath the actual siding and then tucked underneath your shingles. And it's set in a way where it's running downhill like this. And they have this tucked up. Let's say this is tucked up underneath the siding. This is tucked up underneath the shingles. And then it's lapped like this. What can happen with that occasionally is you may see a bunch of moss build up. Can you see this? Moss build up, or you may see rot where that siding actually meets that roof. Generally, that's an indication that something's going on with the flashing. It hasn't been flashed out quite right. And as water runs down, it actually wicks up into the siding and starts rotting that out. So that's where two roofs meet, or a wall meets a roof. That sort of thing is where that step flashing generally comes into play. I'm not going to get into kick-out flashing right now. That's something else. So you have that step flashing where those two meet. As far as the nails, so you have different types of nails. Generally, cap nails like this. They can be different lengths. These are shorties. These are what are used to hold on like the roof felt. So as they lay this roof felt out, they're going to use these little cap nails to be able to basically hold that roof felt down that gets nailed in just into the sheathing, and it holds that down. The colors can be all different colors. You can have orange and blue and all sorts of different colors. But the reason I show you this is that I have seen it where there's shingle damage, and that actually, that cap, you end up seeing that cap nail. And that can be a real big indicator that something's not right. Or you find these little plastic pieces. This is rare, but you find these little plastic pieces, they actually break off. And you find these little plastic chunks that look like that laying in your yard. And that's usually an indication that some kind of force has gotten underneath that and ripped that off, because if the felt's holding down underneath and that cap pops off, and you've had that much to be able to pop these off, you have a real problem. So cap nails generally are going to be what holds the felt down. And then you have what's called a roofing nail. That's where it has a big flat head, and they're usually about that long, about 1.5 inches, 1.25 inches, something along that line. But they have a bigger head, and these are actually what are holding the shingles down. So when they're laying these shingles out, and I don't have a full shingle, but when they're laying these shingles out, they'll actually put these nails in just above this line, a certain amount of nails for the shingle, whatever the shingle calls for, and then the next layer gets laid down over the top so you don't see those nails. We were talking about this ridge cap before. These are generally held on by just longer roofing nails. So ridge cap can get damaged a couple of different ways. And usually what happens with that is, again, you have this sitting over your ridge and it's kind of raised up. So if you look up there and you see a spot where your roof goes all of a sudden jumps up, that's usually a ridge cap. Like I said, they're usually nailed on with like a 3-inch style roofing nail. And you can see in this case here, it shows the spot where it gets nailed. It gets nailed over here, and then it gets nailed a certain amount, right? The manufacturer has a certain amount of spacing that they call for these ridge caps to be held down. Does that mean that every roofer does that? No. I've seen it where some of these ridge caps are barely held on, or they lose the long nails, so they use their short ones, and they smash it down, and it doesn't hold long enough, and all of a sudden it pops off. So that's one of those things that you have to look for. The other is that you have this, what's called the ridge cap, and this is basically what covers up, or they call it cap shingles. This is basically what covers up that ridge cap. And again, they just get standard shingles, and they can cut them off in an angle like this, and they can lay them over, and they get the next one, the next one, the next one, right? What can happen with these, especially because, again, it's way up at the peak, a lot of times most roofers are going to look at this and kind of think about, all right, which way is the prevailing wind coming from? And let's say this in here, it's a west wind. So a lot of times they may not think of that. And you get that west wind that comes flying up and it grabs this. As it lifts that shingle, sometimes because that shingle's nailed through, supposedly with those longer nails, it can, as it lifts up, it can also try to pull the ridge cap up. So let's say your prevailing wind is this way. A lot of times roofers, if they're thinking, are going to run it opposite way, if that makes sense. So that wind, as a general rule, is going to be running in this direction and not wanting to get up underneath that. Hopefully that makes sense. But these little ridge caps too, I've seen it where these get popped off and you may see a piece of shingle that looks like this laying in the yard. So, and again, like I said, they should talk about this in insurance class and stuff like that. If you don't know and you have a question on it, you can always call your insurance company and say, hey, we just had a windstorm and I'm finding things in my yard that I think are off my roof. Can you come out and take a look at it? A lot of times, yeah, they're going to send somebody out to be able to take a look at that. It's part of the reason you pay all those wonderful prices for insurance. So you might as well have them take a look, because they don't want to have to pay even more damage. Because the issue is this, is that if you have a small leak, even a small roof leak, so say you have a small amount of damage on your shingles, right? And it may be something that you can't even really see, but for some reason you have water going in. It's going to get past your shingles. It's going to get past your felt. It may even get past that ice and water shield. And what's going to happen is it's going to start rotting your sheathing. And in order for them to replace your sheathing, they have to take off chunks and sections of your shingles and all that sort of stuff. So by keeping those shingles in good shape, you're keeping your sheathing in good shape, because that will make that price jump through the roof. And as a general rule, most of the time when you get to the point you're having to have your shingles replaced, don't be surprised if they say, hey, you have 3 or 4 sections of roof sheathing that need to be replaced because of various leaks or whatever. So kind of keep that in mind, that may come up. But if you can do something to kind of catch that ahead of time, great. So
If you want to collect water in a rain barrel, does it matter what roofing materials you use?
so that's a good question. So, all right, I'm gonna give my personal opinion on this. Like I said, the asphalt shingles are just that, asphalt or they're fiberglass. I am not one that knows exactly the chemical composition of what they're made up of, but I do know that they are an oil-based product. That being said, as you know, water's running off the roof and stuff like that, you know, is it safe for plants? Yeah. Is it safe for vegetables? I'm not one to be able to say that. I'd be a little leery, but I'm not that expert. So that's where you'd want to talk to. I would actually, if you really had that kind of question as far as water coming off your roof, I would talk to your extension office in, you know, your local college, like here in Michigan State has the MSU extension, where they'd be able to really probably be able to weigh in on that. I'm sure you can Google it also. Be careful as far as what you Google, because you're probably going to get 1,000 different answers. But you can also talk to master gardeners, that sort of stuff in your area. They're probably going to be able to have their say in that. Now, like a metal roof, I don't see much of an issue with that. The only thing I might be a little leery on with a metal roof is, what is the roof painted with? You know, what is that paint? The metal itself, it's not lead or anything, it's just aluminum. That's not necessarily that bad.
Well, and nobody roofs with like this level of plastic corrugated.
Yeah, the plastic stuff, right. Yeah, this is more like, you know, I built a little carport. I'm going to buy some cheap plastic, you know, roofing to throw over it to keep stuff off my car. That's not really for a roof, but it's kind of like a lean-to or something along that line. So they do have this stuff also, but you don't want to use that for your roof.
But it has probably no chemical content that would hurt things, but I don't know.
I'm not.
You gotta have special water bottles now too. So,
Right.
you
So
know.
I'm staying away from
Yeah.
that one. But,
We will have a master gardener here on the 9th of November who might be able to answer that roofing question also. So we'll try to remember, but if that was your question, please try to watch that night and send that question back in, because we'd be glad to try to find you an answer, but we're going to have a master gardener here who might be able to tell us. Does anyone have any other questions for Lee?
yes. No.
There are good roofing companies in Kalamazoo.
They are, yeah.
We don't recommend anyone ever.
I do want to say something about that. Sorry.
It's all right. That's why we're here.
If you're getting, if you're getting a roofing company, get a reputable roofing company. Make sure they're licensed and insured, and that they've been around a while. Roofers can, just because somebody can lay down shingles does not necessarily mean they're laying them down correctly. And a quick example of that is sometimes they'll use what are called staples to be able to hold shingles on. And I've seen it where the roofer has installed the shingle incorrectly, therefore the shingle warranty is totally void. So that's one of those little details you want to ask, like, hey, what kind of shingles do you use? How do you attach them? Do you follow recommendations of the particular shingle company so that it holds its warranty?
Well, and sometimes your warranty will be voided if you try to do a repair also.
Right. Yep.
So, that's one of those questions when you get some estimates on a roof, that make sure that if you go up to fix something that is
Yep.
a simple repair, that you're not voiding the warranty for the entire roof, not
Right.
because it's all or nothing.
Yeah.
It's
So,
not-
yeah, I mean, it said, roof is one of those things that you don't want to mess with necessarily. And there are people out there that will get up there and work on them. fine. If you have those skills, you're willing to live with the consequences, cool. But if you're not, you may want to call somebody that's reputable. So I'll take it back over to you.
And I'll just add one comment. I have a friend who just got a metal roof, and he explored for quite a long time to decide if he wanted to reshingle or do the metal. The metal was not that much more expensive, and they put it right on top because he didn't have layers and layers.
Right.
They put it right on top of what was there. They were in and out doing a good sized roof and his garage in less than 3 days with no mess and nothing hitting the ground like the grit and the broken shingles or, you know, the scraps or anything. So it was quite impressive to watch.
Yeah, I would say if you have that metal roofing put on, you know, like Dean was talking about, make sure your sheathing's in good shape. And he said if you're going to do that, you know, it really sucks because there are some guys out there that'll just be like, yep, we'll throw it on. You know, we never said that we'd check your roof sheathing. You know, they're up there tiptoeing around because they don't want to fall through, but they'll lay that down sometimes. So
the way we knew that they were there is we heard them pounding. They went around with this almost like a tamper.
Yeah.
And did his whole roof.
Oh, check it. See if there's soft spots. See,
there
that's
were any
good.
soft spots. Yeah. It was a company, I think, out of Hastings or Lansing, and they brought in Amish people to put the roof down. Yeah. So it was, you know, he had really done a lot of homework and checking, and you know, is very happy so far with this roof. I'm sad because
you don't want to go with the cheapest estimate.
Yep. The other things, don't necessarily go cheap with a roof. The only thing I was disappointed with the metal roof was I thought we'd hear it raining in the house, and you don't.
You don't necessarily.
I was expecting that nice, you know, plink, plink, plink noise, and you don't get it because there's already a roof underneath it. So it's even just almost like that much more insulation. You know,
That makes sense.
Just those
Sound
cats that
insulation,
get
at
on
least,
that top-end roof.
well, the squirrels no longer run across his roof,
Because they just slide.
and the doves, if they don't perch just right on the peak, go meow and fly away. It's kind of fun to watch. But thank you for joining us this evening. We hope you learned something about how your roof works. And that if you have any questions, again, you can contact us by email or give us a phone call or send me a text, and we will try to get questions answered for you. Again, we will have a class in a couple of weeks about gardening, and she may have some answers about the materials used for roofing. So we will have a class next week. Hope you can join us at 6 o'clock, and we will see you then. Thank you, Lee. We, as always, appreciate you being here and taking care of us and teaching us all sorts of good things. So, and thank you, Lori, for filming this evening.
You're welcome.
You should turn the camera.
Yeah, turn yourself around, Lori. Say goodbye.
No. Maybe next time.
Lori is green and has 6 warts on her nose and a horn on top of her head. No. Yep, that's her Halloween costume. She's really a lovely lady, and we're so glad she comes and helps. So again, if you have questions, let us know. And thanks for coming tonight. Bye.
Okay.